In today's episode, we're diving into the most chilling chimpanzee attacks ever recorded. From people keeping chimpanzees as pets, to attacks in zoos, to safaris totally gone wrong, chimpanzees attack everywhere. Let's dive into the first story. On a brisk autumn afternoon in 2009, Carol Hennigan was preparing for a small dinner party at her sprawling estate in Stamford, Connecticut. The 61-year-old wealthy widow moved efficiently through her kitchen, occasionally glancing out the window at her 5-acre property with its manicured gardens and the custom-built addition that housed her most prized possession, a 120-pound male chimpanzee named Maxie. Carol had acquired Maxie when he was just an infant. Over the years, she had raised him as if he were her child, dressing him in human clothes, teaching him to use the toilet, and even allowing him to sit at the dinner table where he would drink wine. What Carol failed to understand, despite numerous warnings from primatologists, was that despite their human-like appearance, adult male chimpanzees possess explosive strength up to 8 times greater than the strongest human athletes, with unpredictable mood swings that can transform them from playful to territorial aggressors in seconds. There had been warning signs over the years. When Maxie was 10, he had bitten a delivery man. 3 years later, he had attacked a neighbor's teenage son. Both incidents had resulted in lawsuits that Carol quietly settled using her wealth, refusing to acknowledge the escalating danger. Maxie had been agitated all morning, pacing his enclosure and occasionally letting out sharp barking sounds. Concerned that he might disrupt her evening plans, Carol decided to give him a special treat, a glass of wine and some of his favorite strawberry ice cream. She entered his enclosure and bent down to place the tray on Maxie's table when the chimpanzee lunged at her with explosive violence. With his unpredictable sudden outburst, he tore away skin and tissue using his powerful hands. Maxie's assault was instinctual and devastatingly effective, targeting the face, hands, and genitals as chimpanzees naturally do in aggressive conflicts. Carol screamed, alerting her housekeeper, who immediately called emergency services. When police arrived, they found Maxie still in a state of frenzied aggression, his fur matted with Carol's blood. Officers broke into the enclosure, and when Maxie charged at them, they were forced to shoot him multiple times. Carol was still alive when paramedics reached her, though barely. The damage to her face was catastrophic. Her eyes, nose, and lips had been torn away. Despite the best efforts of emergency medical personnel and surgeons, Carol Hennigan died from her injuries 3 days later. On a cold October evening in 2005, the traveling circus arrived in Lviv, Ukraine, pitching its grand striped tent on the outskirts of the city. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the sprawling fields, while a crisp wind carried the scent of damp earth and sawdust. Beyond the circus grounds, the woods loomed like silent spectators, their skeletal branches scratching at the twilight sky. Beneath the glow of string lights, the air buzzed with excitement, yet an uneasy tension lingered, a fragile harmony that would soon unravel. Miroslava Horvath, a seasoned animal trainer, stood backstage adjusting her costume and preparing for the night. She had always been captivated by animals. Growing up in a small Carpathian village, she spent her childhood befriending stray dogs and observing the wild creatures that roamed the nearby forests. Her fascination grew into a calling. By her mid-20s, she had gained recognition as one of the most skilled trainers in the country. Her methods were unique, based on trust, patience, and empathy, rather than fear or dominance. Among her colleagues, she was known as the Animal Whisperer, a title she wore with pride. But it was her relationship with Nadia, a young female chimpanzee, that had earned her nationwide acclaim. Nadia had been transported to Ukraine 2 years earlier after being rescued from harsh conditions in an illegal wildlife trade operation. The chimpanzee's frail body and frightened eyes told a story of neglect and trauma. While others saw a challenge, Miroslava saw an opportunity to heal. She took Nadia under her wing, devoting countless hours to gaining her trust. Slowly, the wary animal opened up, revealing a sharp intelligence and a playful spirit. Together, they crafted a routine that dazzled audiences. Nadia, balanced on tight ropes, performed human-like gestures and interacted seamlessly with Miroslava. Their act became the centerpiece of the circus, a sign of the profound bond between human and animal. Yet, despite their success, there were moments of unease. Sometimes during quiet rehearsals, Nadia's gaze would darken, her body tensing as though recalling a memory too painful to surface. Miroslava dismissed these as fleeting echoes of her past, unaware that they were harbingers of a storm brewing beneath the surface. That night, the tent was packed to capacity. The audience buzzed with anticipation as the show began, each act building toward the highlight of the evening, Miroslava and Nadia's performance. When the spotlight illuminated them in the center ring, the crowd erupted in applause. Miroslava led Nadia through the routine, her voice calm and encouraging. The chimpanzee responded with precision, her movements flawless, her presence captivating. Every gesture, every leap was met with gasps and cheers. But as the performance reached its peak, something changed. Nadia hesitated on the tightrope, her gaze darting between the crowd and Miroslava. A flicker of unease crossed the trainer's face, but she pressed on, offering reassuring words. The audience noticed nothing amiss, their eyes fixed on the poised animal. Then, without warning, Nadia let out a piercing scream. The sound cut through the tent, freezing the spectators in their seats. Before anyone could react, Nadia lunged at Miroslava, her powerful limbs colliding with the trainer. The first blow sent Miroslava sprawling onto the sawdust floor. The second was a blur of teeth and fists. Gasps of horror burst forth from the crowd as the chimpanzee unleashed a fury unlike anything they had seen. Blood sprayed across the stage as Nadia's teeth tore into Miroslava's face and neck. Her once bright costume darkened with crimson, and the trainer's desperate cries were drowned out by the chaos. Parents shielded their children's eyes while others screamed for help. Behind the scenes, circus workers sprang into action, armed with poles and tranquilizer rifles. They swarmed the stage, struggling to restrain Nadia. The chimpanzee snarled and thrashed, her strength far exceeding what the handlers had anticipated. After several agonizing minutes of chaos, a shot rang out, a tranquilizer dart striking Nadia. The sedative took hold and she collapsed, subdued but still alive, as Miroslava lay motionless on the ground, her body battered and bloodied. Paramedics arrived swiftly, navigating through the panicked crowd to reach the injured trainer. Miroslava was barely conscious, her breaths shallow and labored. As they rushed her to the hospital, the tent fell silent, the audience too stunned to move. Nadia, tranquilized and restrained, was transported to a nearby holding facility, her fate sealed. She would not return to the circus. Instead, she was transferred to a conservation center to be evaluated by professionals. In the hospital, doctors fought to stabilize Miroslava. Her injuries were extensive. Deep lacerations on her face, neck, and arms, along with a fractured jaw. For days, her condition teetered on the edge. When she finally regained consciousness, the physical pain was overshadowed by a heavy emotional burden. The attack had not only scarred her body, but shattered the trust she had spent years building. At the Conservation Center, experts worked tirelessly to understand Nadia's sudden aggression. Their analysis revealed a haunting reality. Years of abuse and neglect before her rescue had left her with deep psychological wounds. The attack on Miroslava, they determined, was a tragic response to these unhealed traumas, triggered by the intense and unnatural pressures of performing. Months passed. Miroslava faced a long road to recovery, enduring multiple surgeries and physical therapy. Her once beaming face was now marked by scars that told a story of survival. Though the attack had ended her career as a performer, it did not extinguish her passion for animals. Instead, it ignited a new purpose, advocating for ethical treatment and raising awareness about the dangers of exploiting wild creatures for entertainment. Nadia's rehabilitation at the Conservation Center progressed gradually. Away from the stresses of circus life, her aggression diminished and she began to exhibit cautious curiosity. The staff focused on providing her with enrichment activities and the companionship of other primates, creating an environment where she could regain stability and trust. The incident left a lasting impact, prompting discussions about the ethical treatment of animals and the consequences of their exploitation in entertainment. St. James and LaDonna's story began in West Covina, California, a town that bore witness to the unfolding chapters of their lives. They met as teenagers, fell in love, and became high school sweethearts. For years, they were inseparable, and their relationship blossomed amidst the expectations of family and friends who eagerly anticipated their union. But St. James, a tall and charismatic NASCAR driver with a deep passion for cars, hesitated. He feared marriage would anchor him, pulling him away from the thrill of racing and tinkering with engines. Still, in 1966, under mounting pressure, St. James finally agreed to marry LaDonna. On their wedding day, family and friends gathered in a small brick church, their faces lit with anticipation. LaDonna waited in her white dress, but St. James never arrived. Instead, he spent the day at a garage, lost in his true passion. News of his absence spread quickly, and the town's disappointment turned into outright disdain. For years, his name became synonymous with betrayal and cowardice. Seeking to escape the judgment of his community, St. James found solace in a newspaper advertisement. A merchant ship was seeking crew members for a long-distance voyage. The job promised adventure and anonymity, with all expenses covered. Despite having no experience on the sea, St. James saw an opportunity to leave his failures behind. He boarded the ship and embarked on a journey that would change his life forever. Months into the voyage, while near the coast of Africa, the ship suffered a mechanical failure and docked in Tanzania for repairs. During his time there, St. James joined a group of Tanzanian hunters and traveled with them into the forests. During one of their hunts, the group killed a female chimpanzee shortly after it gave birth, leaving the newborn to fend for itself. Stricken by the scene, St. James took the orphaned chimp under his care, naming him Mo. The bond they formed during those days in Tanzania became unbreakable. Returning to California was a logistical challenge, but St. James managed it with the help of German missionaries who secured his flight. When he arrived at the airport, he was greeted by his mother Estelle and an uninvited LaDonna who had come to confront him. Her anger melted into astonishment when she saw the tiny chimpanzee clinging to St. James. Mo's arrival softened the animosity between them, and in time, LaDonna forgave St. James. In 1970, they finally married in a modest ceremony. Mo, dressed in a tiny suit, served as their best man. The unconventional family found joy in their shared life, and Mo became their surrogate child. Tragedy, however, struck just a year into their marriage. LaDonna was diagnosed with cancer and required a hysterectomy. Devastated by the loss of her ability to have children, she considered leaving St. James. But he reassured her, reminding her that they already had a child in Mo. Together, they poured their love into raising the chimpanzee, marveling at his intelligence and emotional depth. For years, the family thrived, but the challenges of raising a wild animal in a suburban environment soon caught up with them. In 1998, a welder hired to repair Mo's cage accidentally left equipment behind which shocked and frightened Mo. The chimp escaped and was missing for hours before being apprehended. During the incident, Mo caused damage to a police car and injured an officer. The following year, a visitor ignored warnings and placed her hand inside Mo's cage. Mistaking her red fingernail for candy, Mo bit her fingertip. These incidents painted Mo as a danger to the community, and authorities deemed him unfit to remain with the Davises. Police officers arrived at their home armed with tranquilizers and forcibly removed Mo. St. James resisted, only to be overpowered and pinned to the ground. Mo, distressed by the commotion, screamed and thrashed as officers tranquilized him and transported him to a holding facility. The Davises were heartbroken, their home now silent and empty without their beloved companion. After years of legal battles, St. James and LaDonna succeeded in transferring Mo to Animal Haven Ranch in 2004. The sanctuary promised Mo a safer environment and allowed the Davises to visit him regularly. On March 3, 2005, they arrived at the ranch to celebrate Mo's 39th birthday. They bought balloons, toys, and a frosted sheet cake filled with raspberry, eager to make the day special. When Mo saw them, his joy was immediate. He clapped his hands and howled, thrilled to be reunited. Though he may not have understood it was his birthday, he knew they loved him. LaDonna cut the cake and shared it with St. James before offering Mo his piece. Mo eagerly accepted, his gentle hands taking the cake with a quiet affection. It was a reunion filled with love, as if no time had passed. As the celebration unfolded, the family's joy was shattered by an unthinkable event. A young male chimpanzee escaped its enclosure and charged toward LaDonna. The chimp attacked, biting her hand and ripping off her thumb. St. James rushed to protect her, only to be ambushed by another, larger chimp. As the chaos unfolded, Mo did not join the attack but watched helplessly while the two chimps overwhelmed St. James, biting his face, gouging out his eye, and mutilating his body. They tore at his flesh, breaking bones and leaving him unrecognizable. LaDonna screamed for help as the chimps continued their brutal attack. The sanctuary's owner's son-in-law, Mark Carruthers, arrived with a firearm and shot both chimps, ending the assault. Paramedics rushed St. James to the hospital where doctors induced a coma to manage his extensive injuries. Despite multiple surgeries to reconstruct his face, St. James's life was forever altered. He became permanently reliant on LaDonna, who remained by his side caring for him as they both grieved the events of that day. In 2007, tragedy struck again when Mo disappeared from the sanctuary. Despite extensive searches, no trace of him was ever found. The Davises' hope of reuniting with Mo dwindled, leaving them with only memories of the chimp who had defined their lives for 3 decades. Today, St. James bears the physical scars of the attack, but the emotional wounds run deeper. "I can talk for days about Mo," he said in an interview. "I just miss him so much. I've never loved anything as much as I loved Mo." The Davises' story is a haunting reminder of the complexities and dangers of human relationships with wild animals. April 14, 2013 began like any other day in Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The morning rains had left the forest damp and shimmering under the mid-morning sun. Beams of light filtered through the dense canopy, creating a mosaic of greens and golds on the forest floor. Birds called from high branches, insects droned incessantly, and the occasional rustle of leaves hinted at unseen animals moving within the shadows. Spanning more than 3,000 square miles, Virunga is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. It's a sanctuary for countless species, including the rare and majestic mountain gorilla. Yet beneath its stunning beauty lies a harsh and often violent reality. The forest is home to predators and territorial animals, including chimpanzees, whose intelligence and strength make them fearsome creatures. These apes, while fascinating, can be alarmingly aggressive. When provoked or when they perceive a threat, they attack with speed and ferocity, often with devastating consequences. The park is bordered by small villages where communities live in a delicate balance with the untamed wilderness. One such village was home to 6-year-old Dunia Sibomana, who lived in a modest hut with his father, younger brother, and extended family. Following his mother's death 2 years earlier, Dunia's father struggled to provide for his children, leaving much of Dunia's care to the community. Despite this hardship, Dunia was a lively and adventurous boy, his curiosity and infectious laughter endearing him to all. He spent most of his days playing with his 4-year-old brother and cousin, the trio bound by a love of exploration and mischief. That fateful afternoon, Dunia and the other boys ventured toward the forest, following a familiar trail near the village. Dunia led the way, his bare feet kicking up small clouds of dust as he ran ahead laughing. His brother and cousin chased after him, their voices echoing through the trees. The elders had often warned the boys about the dangers of the forest, but to them it was a world of wonder and endless adventure. Unaware of the watchful eyes hidden in the shadows, they played without fear, oblivious to the lurking danger that would soon shatter their innocence. Deep within the trees, a troop of chimpanzees moved silently through the undergrowth. These apes were the undisputed rulers of their domain, patrolling their territory with precision and vigilance. Male chimps in particular were known for their aggressive displays and quick tempers, especially when they perceived an intruder. This troop had strayed closer to the village than usual, their sharp senses attuned to the sounds of human activity. The laughter of the boys reached their ears, an unfamiliar and unsettling sound in their world. The troop's leader, a massive male with a scar running across his brow, stopped abruptly. His dark eyes narrowed and he let out a low, guttural bark. The others froze, their attention focused on him. With a sudden burst of energy, he surged forward, his powerful arms propelling him through the trees. The other males followed, their movements coordinated and purposeful. The boys were oblivious to the danger approaching. Dunia had paused on the trail to point out a brightly colored bird perched on a nearby branch. He turned to share his discovery with his brother and cousin, but the words caught in his throat. Movement in the undergrowth drew his attention, and his heart began to race. Before he could fully process what he was seeing, the chimps burst from the forest. Dunia screamed for the boys to run, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. The boys scattered, their small legs pumping furiously as they sprinted back toward the village. But the chimps were faster. Their long arms and powerful legs carried them across the ground with terrifying speed. Dunia could hear the thudding of their movements, growing louder with every passing second. He dared a glance over his shoulder and saw them closing in, their faces twisted in expressions of rage. The leader of the troop reached Dunia's younger brother first. The boy's terrified scream echoed through the forest before it was abruptly silenced. Dunia froze, his legs refusing to move as he watched the horrific scene unfold. His cousin's cries joined the cacophony, a desperate plea for help that Dunia could do nothing to answer. Then the leader turned his attention to Dunia. The first blow sent him sprawling to the ground, his face hitting the dirt with a sickening thud. He tried to crawl away, but the chimp's immense strength pinned him down. Dunia screamed as the ape's teeth tore into his cheek, the pain blinding and all-consuming. Blood poured from the wound, staining the earth beneath him. His left hand shot up instinctively to protect his face, and the chimp bit down, severing his middle finger. The world around him blurred as pain and fear overwhelmed his senses. The sounds of the attack carried back to the village, and a group of adults rushed to the scene. Dunia's father was among them, his heart pounding as he ran toward his son's cries. The chimps, startled by the approaching humans, retreated into the forest, their dark forms disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. What they left behind was a scene of devastation. Dunia's brother and cousin lay lifeless on the ground, their small bodies broken and bloodied. Dunia himself was barely conscious, his face a mask of blood and torn flesh. His father scooped him into his arms, his hands trembling as he carried his son back to the village. The journey to the nearest medical center was agonizing. Dunia drifted in and out of consciousness, his faint cries breaking the heavy silence in the vehicle. His injuries were catastrophic. His lips were gone, his cheek was shredded, his ear was mangled, and his left hand was permanently disfigured. The doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize him, though it was clear that his life would never be the same. Dunia survived, but the attack left him profoundly changed. His once bright, curious eyes now carried the weight of trauma, and his physical scars were a constant reminder of the violence he had endured. The boy who had once led his brother and cousin on fearless adventures now struggled to navigate a world that had been irrevocably altered. The forest, once a place of wonder and possibility, was now a source of nightmares. For Dania, it would never again be the magical playground it had once seemed. It was a reminder of a day when innocence met the raw, unforgiving power of the wild and lost. It was a bright summer afternoon at the local zoo, where the sounds of children's laughter and the distant calls of animals filled the air. Natasha Lee, a 22-year-old handler, had always found solace among the creatures she cared for. Her dream, born from childhood visits to the zoo, had come true when she was hired as a full-time handler. Over the years, she had worked with a variety of animals, but there was one she had formed an unbreakable bond with: Walter, a 10-year-old chimpanzee born at the zoo. Walter was no ordinary chimp. Unlike the aggressive reputation his kind often carried, he was gentle and playful, always eager to interact with visitors. Natasha had raised him from infancy after his mother died of an unknown illness when he was just a baby. She spent countless hours with him, talking, playing, and forming a bond that was nearly inseparable. As he grew, Walter became the zoo's main attraction, drawing crowds with his friendly antics. His behavior defied the natural tendencies of his species, and he was adored by staff and visitors alike. Over time, Natasha and the other staff grew complacent in their belief that Walter's gentle nature made him immune to the violent tendencies typically seen in chimpanzees. They trusted that their bond would keep him in check. But beneath the surface of Walter's calm demeanor, the instincts of a wild creature remained. The balance between human and animal was always fragile. One afternoon, a routine visit to Walter's enclosure turned into a nightmare. Natasha, busy tending to other animals nearby, was unaware that Walter had managed to break free from his pen. Chaos erupted. The sound of screaming filled the air as Walter, agitated and disoriented, began rampaging through the zoo. Visitors ran in all directions, seeking refuge as Walter threw objects and charged at anyone in his path. His once playful eyes were now wide with confusion and rage. When Natasha heard the commotion, she rushed toward the noise. She found him standing in the middle of the path, his eyes fixed on her, recognition flashing in them for a brief moment. But something had changed. The calm, playful companion she had known for years was gone, replaced by a ferocious animal. Walter screamed a guttural, shrill sound and charged at her with a violence she had never anticipated. Despite her size and strength, Natasha was no match for Walter's power. He tackled her to the ground, his hands gripping her face with terrifying force. She felt his sharp teeth sink into her flesh as he began tearing at her skin, biting and mauling with a primal fury. The pain was unbearable, and her screams were drowned out by the horrified cries of the zoo's visitors, some frozen in terror, others too shocked to capture anything but the blur of violence unfolding before them. Natasha fought back with every ounce of strength, but Walter was relentless. His powerful arms ripped into her, biting through her face, neck, and shoulders. Deep, savage marks left her body bloodied and torn. The agony was overwhelming, but her thoughts were not on her suffering. They were on the animal she had raised. This was Walter, her friend, and yet he was no longer the gentle chimp she had known. Minutes stretched like hours as Walter continued his brutal attack, throwing Natasha against the ground, his primal instincts now fully in control. Her body was covered in blood as she screamed his name, hoping to reach him to make him understand. But it was useless. The connection they once shared was severed. Natasha could no longer see the chimp she had cared for, only an animal driven by raw instinct. The chaos continued, and time seemed to lose all meaning. The zoo's emergency response team arrived, armed with tranquilizers and tools designed to subdue dangerous animals. In a tense and desperate few moments, they managed to neutralize Walter, though not without difficulty. The staff rushed to Natasha's side, pulling her from the unconscious grip of the chimp and whisking her away for immediate medical attention. The hospital became the battlefield for her survival. Surgeons worked tirelessly to repair the extensive damage, multiple fractures, a punctured lung, and deep lacerations. The recovery process was long and painful, but Natasha survived. Yet, even after the physical wounds healed, something in her had changed. The person who had once walked fearlessly among the animals now found herself haunted by the memory of Walter's attack. The zoo, after much deliberation, made the heartbreaking decision to euthanize Walter. It was the only course of action left. The chimp, once a symbol of connection between human and animal, could no longer be trusted. For Natasha, the loss was profound. Despite the violence he had inflicted upon her, she could not escape the feeling of failure. Walter had been more than an animal to her, he had been a companion, and now that bond was broken forever. In the years that followed, Natasha continued to work at the zoo, her body bearing the scars of the attack. She struggled with anxiety, depression, and the lingering fear of the animals she once loved. But she refused to give up on her passion. Slowly, she began to regain her confidence, learning to trust the animals again, though always with caution. July 9, 2012 was an oppressively hot summer evening in Raleigh, North Carolina. The sky was tinged with the last traces of daylight, cicadas buzzing in the thick air as the sun dipped behind the trees. The suburban neighborhood was quiet, its streets lined with modest homes, each with neatly trimmed lawns and driveways filled with parked cars. It was the kind of place where neighbors exchanged pleasantries, where the biggest disturbances were backyard barbecues or the occasional barking dog. At the end of a cul-de-sac, a single-story house sat nestled among the trees, its windows glowing faintly against the growing dusk. Inside, the Collins family was gathering for dinner, an evening ritual that had remained unchanged for years. The house had been in the family for decades, inherited by Barbara Collins after her parents passed away. At 54 years old, Barbara had lived alone for some time, her only constant companion being Toby, the chimpanzee she had raised since infancy. Her daughter, Rebecca Collins, 38, visited often. A school administrator and single mother, she lived only 15 minutes away and made it a habit to check on her mother regularly. She had never fully approved of Toby but had learned to tolerate his presence. He had been part of the family for over a decade, treated more like a child than an animal. Barbara had raised him as if he were human, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, and speaking to him in a tone usually reserved for a young child. But as Toby grew, so did her unease. Rebecca's friend Matthew Carter, 41, was joining them for dinner that night. He had never met Toby before but had heard stories. He was polite but hesitant, well aware of the risks associated with keeping exotic animals in captivity. But Barbara had reassured them both. Toby was gentle, well-behaved, and no threat to anyone. Outside, the evening was settling into its usual calm, but inside the house, tension lingered beneath the surface. Toby had been restless all day, pacing near the window, staring outside with an intensity that put Rebecca on edge. His behaviors had been changing in recent months, more unpredictable, more aggressive. He had begun reacting violently to loud noises, baring his teeth at unfamiliar visitors, and slamming his fist against the walls in frustration. Neighbors had already reported him escaping 3 times. He had once chased a dog down the street, another time throwing patio furniture into the road. Each time, animal control officers had warned Barbara of the risks. Each time, she had ignored them. Despite strict local regulations governing the housing of exotic animals, Barbara had managed to keep Toby as a pet by obtaining a special permit. The authorities required extensive safety measures, regular inspections, and proof of appropriate containment facilities for any primate kept in a private residence. Barbara argued that Toby was a well-socialized companion, a claim that allowed her to secure the necessary paperwork despite numerous warnings from wildlife experts about the unpredictable nature of such animals. Many critics, however, contended that the regulations were too lenient and failed to adequately address the inherent risks of keeping a chimpanzee as a pet. Yet, beneath the seemingly ordinary domestic scene, an unsettling undercurrent was growing, a silent indication that a disaster would soon shatter the fragile peace of their home. That night, as dinner was prepared and conversation filled the house, something inside Toby snapped. The meal had just been served when Toby became agitated. He had been pacing for most of the evening, his movements quick and restless, shoulders rising and falling with each breath. His gaze had remained locked on the windows, watching the street outside, his body language rigid and tense. His agitation was nothing new, but tonight there was an edge to it, something unsettled and unpredictable. Barbara had always dismissed his erratic behavior as moods that would pass, moments of frustration she believed she could control. But tonight, Toby wasn't listening to her commands. Rebecca noticed it first, the way he clenched and unclenched his hands, the subtle shifts in his posture. When Matthew sat down across from him, the chimpanzee's entire body stiffened, his lips pulling back slightly to expose his large canines. It was a warning, the kind of signal that would have sent any trained handler on high alert. Barbara barely reacted. She had spent years convincing herself that Toby was not like other chimpanzees, that he was different, special, human in his own way. She had ignored the warnings, the expert advice, the fines from animal control. She had convinced herself that love and routine were enough to suppress the instincts that had been ingrained in Toby since birth. The moment came suddenly. 1 second Toby was still, his dark eyes locked onto Matthew. The next he was moving. His powerful body launched forward with unnatural speed, closing the distance in an instant. The force of the impact knocked Matthew's chair backwards, sending him sprawling onto the floor. The sound of breaking glass followed as a dish crashed from the table, but it was drowned out by the guttural shrieks coming from Toby as he clamped his jaws onto Matthew's face. The first bite was devastating. Canines strong enough to puncture bone tore into Matthew's jaw, peeling away skin and muscle. The weight of the chimpanzee held him down, fingers digging into his shoulders with inhuman strength. Rebecca screamed as she rushed forward, grabbing at Toby's arm in a desperate attempt to pull him away. The chimpanzee released Matthew only to lash out at her, swinging with an open hand. The blow connected with her wrist, the sharp crack of breaking bone filling the room as she collapsed against the counter. Barbara shouted for Toby to stop, her voice shaking, but the command was meaningless. The chimpanzee wasn't responding to the person who had raised him, the woman who had treated him like her own child. He was lost in pure instinct, his mind locked in a primal fury that no amount of human attachment could undo. Matthew was still struggling beneath him, his hands pushing weakly at Toby's chest, but the attack was relentless. The chimpanzee's fingers curled around his arm, pulling it back at an unnatural angle before biting down again, crushing through the bone. Blood soaked the tile floor as Toby ripped away a piece of flesh, shaking his head violently. Rebecca, disoriented from the pain in her wrist, pushed herself up with her uninjured arm and stumbled toward the back door, breaking its glass as she hit it. Her only thought was escape. She barely registered the glass that cut into her bare feet as she threw open the door and ran. She sprinted across the yard, ignoring the searing pain in her wrist, pounding on a neighbor's door, screaming for help and calling the police in a desperate bid to summon assistance before the situation spiraled further out of control. Inside the house, Matthew's movements had slowed. The chimpanzee was still attacking, his teeth sinking into exposed flesh, his hands grasping at anything they could tear apart. The shrieks of rage had become slower, deeper. Toby's breath was rapid, his chest heaving. The damage had already been done. The first police officers arrived within minutes, responding to the frantic 911 calls. As they pulled into the driveway, the house appeared still, the front door slightly ajar but giving no immediate sign of the chaos inside. The neighborhood was quiet, the surrounding homes undisturbed. There were no screams, no visible struggle, only the eerie silence of a scene already set. Guns drawn, they stepped cautiously inside. Toby was still in the center of the kitchen, his body hunched over Matthew's lifeless form. His mouth and hands were red, his breath coming in sharp, fast bursts. The moment he saw the officers, he moved. The first shot struck center mass, but it did nothing to stop him. The second shot sent him staggering. It wasn't until the third round that Toby finally collapsed, his body twitching before going still. Paramedics entered moments later, but there was nothing they could do for Matthew. His body was barely recognizable. Rebecca was rushed to the hospital with multiple fractures and deep lacerations to her arm. Barbara, physically unscathed, sat frozen in the corner of the room, staring at the body of the animal she had once considered family. Investigators later reviewed the reports that had been filed against Barbara over the years. There had been repeated warnings from wildlife experts, citations for improper containment, recommendations that Toby be placed in a sanctuary where he could be managed safely. Each one had been ignored. Chimpanzees, particularly males raised in isolation, often developed unpredictable aggression as they aged. Their strength was unmatched in close combat, their bite capable of inflicting catastrophic injuries in seconds. Everything about the attack had been preventable. Barbara faced multiple lawsuits, including a wrongful death claim from Matthew's family. Her relatives and close friends were equally outraged and heartbroken over her decision to keep the chimpanzee, a choice they viewed as not only irresponsible but tragically avoidable. They expressed deep sadness, anger, and disbelief at how she could disregard repeated warnings and risk the safety of everyone around her. The incident prompted North Carolina lawmakers to review regulations on exotic animal ownership, leading to stricter laws regarding private ownership of primates. But it was too late to undo what had happened. Jerome and Sandra Harold were a happily married couple. Their home in Stamford, Connecticut had once been filled with the sounds of their daughter Susan's laughter and the busy hum of daily life. But as time passed and Susan married, the house fell silent. The couple, now alone, found themselves consumed by an emptiness that lingered in the halls. The house, once vibrant, now felt hollow. In an attempt to fill the void, they made a decision few would dare to make. They brought home a 3-day-old chimpanzee, choosing to raise it as their new child. The price was steep, $50,000, but to Sandra and Jerome it seemed worth it. They named the chimp Travis, after Sandra's favorite country music star, Travis Tritt. From the moment they brought him home, Travis became their world. They pampered him as if he were their own child, bathing him, feeding him, and even brushing his teeth. He slept in their bed, ate at their table, and joined them for outings. Travis quickly became more than just a pet, he was family. As the years passed, Travis grew bigger and stronger, and his relationship with the Harolds deepened. The couple even built a special room in their house for him, hanging tires from ropes for him to swing on. He learned to do things most people wouldn't expect of a chimpanzee, opening doors, using the remote control, even browsing pictures on the family computer. His charm and friendly nature made him a local celebrity. Neighbors, police officers, and even strangers recognized Travis as the beloved chimpanzee living in Stamford. He was known for his quirky habits, his obsession with baseball, his taste for ice cream, and his ability to log into the computer. The Harolds couldn't have asked for a better companion. But as with all creatures, time would change Travis in ways they never anticipated. In 2003, a strange incident set the stage for what was to come. Jerome, Sandra, and Travis were stuck in traffic when a passerby threw an empty soda can into their car, striking Travis. Without hesitation, Travis unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and chased after the culprit. The situation spiraled out of control, with Travis eluding officers for nearly 2 hours. He eventually returned to the car, but the spectacle led to a new law in Connecticut, banning the ownership of primates heavier than 50 pounds. Despite the chaos, Travis was exempted from the law, largely due to his status as a well-known, previously trained animal. Everything seemed to be fine in the family of Jerome and Sandra. With their animal, they appeared to be a happy couple, living a life that was calm and stable. But in 2004, tragedy struck. Jerome, after a long battle with stomach cancer, passed away. Sandra, now alone, was engulfed by grief. The house, once full of life, fell into darkness. Her sorrow had a profound effect on Travis, who had always seen Jerome as his alpha. As the months passed, Travis's behavior began to change. He had reached adulthood, now weighing over 200 pounds. The Stamford Animal Control Department voiced concerns about his size and strength, advising Sarah that it would no longer be practical to keep him in her home. But Sandra, still mourning Jerome, ignored their warnings. She withdrew from social life, spending her days sitting by the porch staring at the sunsets in a daze. The isolation took its toll on Travis. Without proper exercise, he grew overweight. His once shiny fur turned dull, and his body became flabby. The energetic chimpanzee who had once been the center of their world was now a shadow of his former self. By February 15, 2009, Sandra's emotional state had deteriorated further. On that day, she invited her longtime friend, Charla Nash, over for a visit. Charla had been a frequent guest at the Herald home, and Travis knew her well. After spending the afternoon at Mohegan Sun Casino, Charla and Sandra returned home, but something was off. Travis, usually eager for attention, was unusually quiet. His favorite ice cream sat untouched, and the TV and computer, two of his favorite things, were off. Concerned but not yet alarmed, Sandra mixed Xanax into Travis's tea before heading to bed, hoping to calm him. The next morning, February 16, 2009, Sandra woke to find Travis acting strangely. He wandered aimlessly around the yard, unresponsive to her calls. His movements were slow and his gaze seemed vacant. Growing more uneasy, Sandra called Charla to come over and help. The two women hoped that Travis would calm down with his favorite toy, a red Tickle Me Elmo. But when they approached him in the yard, something snapped. Seeing the toy, Travis went into a violent frenzy, attacking Charla with terrifying force. Travis threw Charla to the ground, and before Sandra could react, he sank his teeth into Charla's face. In an instant, he ripped off her lips, nose, and eyelids with brutal precision. Sandra, in panic, grabbed a shovel and struck Travis several times, but the chimp, unrelenting, continued his savage attack. His strength was overwhelming, and Sandra's efforts to stop him were futile. She rushed inside to grab a kitchen knife, praying it would be enough to stop the violence. She returned to the yard, the knife trembling in her hand, and plunged it into Travis's back. For a brief moment, Travis stopped, glaring at her with wild eyes. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned back to Charla and resumed his attack with even more force. Charla's screams echoed through the neighborhood as Travis tore into her face. Seeing no other option, Sandra fled to her car, locked herself inside, and frantically called 911. The dispatcher's voice remained calm. "What's the problem with your friend?" she asked. "He ripped her face off. He's trying to attack me." Sandra screamed into the phone, her voice a raw, terrified cry. The dispatcher urged Sandra to stay safe, but Sandra could do nothing. Charla lay unconscious in the yard, her body mangled by Travis's relentless assault. The horror unfolded before Sandra's eyes as the chimpanzee continued his violence without hesitation. When Officer Frank Chiafiri arrived, he was met with an unimaginable sight. Travis, still enraged, was roaming the yard, attacking the police car. The chimp smashed the passenger window and unlocked the door, his anger undiminished. Fearing for his life, Officer Chiafari opened fire, shooting Travis 4 times. The chimp stumbled into the house, collapsed on his bed, and died. Charla was rushed to the hospital where she underwent multiple surgeries to reconstruct her face. Her injuries were severe. She lost her left hand along with several fingers on her right hand. The trauma affected not only Charla but also the medical team who cared for her, many of whom sought counseling after the experience. The physical and emotional scars left by the attack were deep. A toxicology report revealed traces of Xanax in Travis's system, which may have contributed to his aggressive behavior. Some speculated that Charla's altered appearance, her changed hair color and curls, may have startled Travis. But the cause of the attack remains uncertain. Charla now lives with the physical and psychological scars, a constant reminder of the day her life was nearly taken by a creature she had once trusted. It was a quiet morning in Sierra Leone on April 23, 2006, as a taxi ascended the steep mountainside toward the Takugama Chimpanzee Sanctuary. Inside the car, Alan Robertson, Gary Brown, and Richie Goody, 3 American subcontractors working on the new American embassy, chatted eagerly with their local guide, Melvin Mama, while Issa Kanu, the driver, remained focused on the road ahead. The excitement of their visit to the sanctuary, a refuge for the many traumatized chimpanzees displaced by the ravages of war and poaching, filled the air. The landscape outside the taxi windows was a vision of lush tropical beauty. Towering trees and dense jungle sprawled beneath a bright blue sky, masking the violence and decay that had befallen this land. But within the sanctuary, something was amiss. A group of chimpanzees, their nerves frayed by years of abuse in captivity, had managed to break free from their enclosures. The electrified fences, weakened by time, failed to hold them in. A pack of 31 young adults, led by a massive male named Bruno, was unleashed, a force born from pain and rage. Bruno, 6 feet tall and 270 pounds, was a sight to behold. A beast hardened by years of human cruelty after being torn from his mother as an infant and sold into a life of captivity for a meager $30. His hatred for humanity had festered in the shadows of captivity, fueling his anger. His dominance, earned through years of pain, left him as the undisputed alpha, a towering figure among his followers. As the men neared the entrance, their taxi was forced to halt in front of a locked gate. Issa Kanu, the driver, honked the horn, waiting for someone to come and open it. The sound echoed through the jungle, drawing the attention of the last thing they wanted to meet that morning, Bruno and his band of followers. The chimps arrived quickly, emerging from the forest like a storm. Bruno, towering above the others, led the charge, his eyes fixed on the vehicle. The men froze, staring in terror as the group of angry primates surrounded the car, slamming their fists against the windows, howling with fury. Bruno, his enormous frame a terrifying sight, stood on the hood of the car, his sharp teeth bared as he screamed in rage. Realizing the danger, Issa slammed the car into reverse, the tires screeching as he tried to escape. But Bruno was faster. In a burst of speed, the alpha chimp leapt onto the car, pounding at the windshield with its fists and teeth, shattering the glass. The sound of smashing glass was drowned out by the screams of the men as the car rolled backward, Bruno's savage assault growing more intense. With horrifying precision, Bruno reached through the rear window, grabbing hold of Melvin's arm. His teeth sank into the flesh and he began to shake his head violently, tearing through bone and muscle. Melvin screamed in agony, but his friends could do nothing to help. In a panic, one of the men screamed at Issa to shift the car into drive. The car lurched forward, knocking Bruno back, but not before the chimp had ripped half of Melvin's hand from his body. Alan and Gary quickly pulled Melvin back into the vehicle, their hands slick with blood as they tried to stop the bleeding. The situation was desperate. Melvin's hand, now a mangled mess of torn flesh, was barely attached. Gary tried to stem the flow of blood, tearing a piece of cloth from his shirt and wrapping it around Melvin's arm. But the horror didn't end there. Issa, realizing the severity of their situation, pushed the car to its limits, steering toward the locked gate in an attempt to ram through it. The vehicle collided with the heavy metal gates. the impact knocking everyone unconscious. When Gary regained consciousness, the first sound that reached his ears was Melvin's agonized screams. He looked around, the wreckage of the taxi surrounding him, but the others were gone. Panic set in as he realized that Bruno had dragged Melvin from the car. The rest of the chimpanzees had begun to feast on the helpless man. Without hesitation, Gary grabbed a wooden log and charged into the jungle, determined to save his friend. Most wild chimpanzees shy away from direct confrontation with humans, but Bruno, a chimp who had spent years living among them, recognized his own strength. Bruno turned toward Gary, the muscles of his massive frame rippling as he moved swiftly. The two clashed, Gary striking the chimp in the neck with a sharp piece of wood. The other chimps hesitated, watching their leader Bruno, his aggression momentarily subdued, retreat into the jungle, leaving his pack to dissolve into the forest. As Gary tried to tend to Melvin, he knew their situation was critical. The distance to the nearest road was far, and Melvin was weakening quickly. Just then, Alan and Richie appeared, having successfully located a military patrol. Richie had managed to find their way to a military camp after traversing the jungle on foot. Once there, he and Alan alerted the soldiers to the dire situation, informing them of Melvin and Gary's location. A military van was dispatched, and the soldiers quickly made their way to the crash site, picking up the injured men and rushing them toward medical care. The vehicle sped down the road, heading toward the nearest medical facility, where Melvin would get the treatment he desperately needed. When asked about his whereabouts, Richie informed Gary that after Issa's attempt to breach the thick metal gate failed, Issa exited the vehicle and climbed over it himself, leaving the rest of his group to fend for themselves as he headed toward the main road. Issa's decision to abandon the group left the others in a vulnerable position, and it was later revealed that his body had been found torn apart by the chimps. His jaw was gone, his limbs ripped from his body, and his flesh eaten by the savage pack. Bruno, the relentless leader, was never found. Though many search parties were sent to find him, Bruno's heightened senses and knowledge of the jungle allowed him to evade capture. He was a ghost, slipping through the forest, a shadow of revenge against the humans who had tormented him. Some whispered that his experiences had made him a master of survival, his hatred of humans sharpened to an almost supernatural level. The experience haunted Gary for months. Nightmares plagued him, but he remained grateful that he had fought off Bruno and rescued Melvin. The brutality of the event, Bruno's terrifying assault, Issa's death, and Melvin's mangled body left a deep mark on his mind. As for Bruno, the anger in his eyes never faded, a reminder of the horrors that had shaped him into the terrifying force that had nearly cost them their lives. In 1975, within the quiet suburb of Maple Grove, Minnesota, Allison and Peter Graves lived a life that straddled the extraordinary and the controversial. Their modest home became a local curiosity for housing Lucy, a 7-year-old chimpanzee they had raised from infancy. Lucy was not merely a pet, she was their pride and joy, integrated so deeply into their lives that she dined at the table, learned to mimic human gestures, and played an active role in family routines. Their fascination with Lucy had begun years earlier when Peter, a biology professor at a nearby university, came across an opportunity to adopt a chimpanzee from a discontinued research project. Captivated by the idea of studying primates up close, he and Allison eagerly took Lucy in. At the time, laws surrounding exotic animal ownership were ambiguous. While federal guidelines discouraged private ownership of large primates, individual states were left to determine their own regulations. Minnesota, like many others, lacked strict laws, allowing individuals to keep exotic animals with little oversight. The Greaves believed their scientific background and personal bond with Lucy exempted them from the inherent risks, a belief that would tragically be proven wrong. Among the frequent visitors to the Graves' home were Linda and Mark Reynolds, close friends who often brought their 8-year-old son, Daniel. Initially, Linda and Mark were apprehensive about visiting a home with a chimpanzee, acutely aware of the risks such animals could pose. However, Peter and Allison assured them that Lucy was gentle and well-trained. The Reynolds reluctantly agreed, and their first visit in early 1974 unfolded without incident. Daniel, enthralled by Lucy's human-like behavior, quickly became comfortable in her presence. As their visits became more frequent, Daniel developed a habit of bringing small treats for Lucy, such as cookies or fruit. Lucy appeared to enjoy these offerings, and Daniel delighted in her reactions, feeling a sense of connection with the animal. Over time, this ritual became a hallmark of their visits. On a warm Sunday afternoon in July 1975, the Reynolds arrived at the Graves home for what they assumed would be another pleasant gathering. The adults settled in the living room, enjoying coffee and pastries as they exchanged updates on their lives. Lucy, dressed in a floral dress, sat in her favorite armchair, her behavior calm and composed. The chimpanzee's gaze followed the conversation, her expressive face giving the impression of a silent observer. As usual, Daniel brought a small bag of cookies, eager to share them with Lucy. Midway through the visit, Daniel approached Lucy with a cookie in hand. Over the past year, he had grown increasingly comfortable around her, trusting the Graves' reassurances of her docility. As he extended his arm, offering the treat, Lucy's eyes locked onto his with an intensity that caused a brief silence to settle over the room. Her expression, unreadable to human eyes, seemed to shift, and the tension in the air became almost palpable. In an instant, everything changed. Lucy lunged from her chair, her powerful arms wrapping around Daniel with startling speed. Her teeth sank into his arm as the boy let out a piercing scream. The adults scrambled to intervene, but Lucy's strength far exceeded theirs. Blood splattered across the cream-colored carpet as Peter and Mark struggled to free Daniel from her grasp. Linda screamed, paralyzed with fear, while Allison frantically tried to distract Lucy with loud noises. It wasn't until Peter managed to strike Lucy with a heavy cushion that she released the boy, her primal instincts still overriding her usual demeanor. When paramedics arrived, Daniel was unconscious and critically injured. Despite the doctor's relentless efforts at Maple Grove General Hospital, he succumbed to his injuries later that evening. The tragedy devastated not only the Reynolds family but the entire community, which struggled to process how such a catastrophe could have occurred. Lucy was tranquilized and relocated to the Primate Sanctuary of North America in Texas, where she lived out her remaining years. Behavioral experts examined her sudden aggression, attributing it to a combination of factors, including confusion from prolonged exposure to human habits, jealousy over Daniel's treat offerings, and overstimulation from the lively household environment on the day of the attack. Witnesses noted Lucy's unusual tense demeanor, which may have contributed to a fight-or-flight response. The tragedy sparked a public outcry and led to the 1976 Exotic Animal Control Act in Minnesota, banning the private ownership of dangerous wildlife and setting a precedent for similar legislation across the country. For Allison and Peter, the guilt was unbearable. They withdrew from public life, shunned by a community that once admired their bond with Lucy. Allison particularly fell into a deep depression, haunted by the belief that she had failed both Lucy and Daniel. The Reynolds, overwhelmed by grief, struggled to reconcile their loss with the reassurances they had been given. Their sorrow was accompanied by frustration toward Allison and Peter, whose insistence that Lucy was safe had proven tragically false. Thanks for watching this compilation. Not done watching yet? Click on the next video right now.